Welcome back to Intro to Mudbox 2017. We're continuing with our sculpting tools. Where we left off with was we went through the first set of sculpting tools. We're going to now go into the Flatten tool. Flatten is pretty much going to do what it sounds like. It's going to take high points and flatten them out to where they are flattened. It's good for when you're trying to build armor or hard surfaces on environment objects. There's a bunch of different uses. You just kind of play with it. That is the premise of the idea of it. Kind of get some stuff like that. Same kind of deal. It's got the same kind of tool options. It's got size, strength. You can use stamps on it, but you don't really need to, since the idea is that you're trying to make it flat. So putting a stamp on it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Okay. Next tool is Foamy. Now Foamy is a little bit like Sculpt, it's just got a little more of a soft feel to it. So when I use Foamy, it feels like a lot like the Sculpt tool. It's just got like I said, it's kind of like just spraying down this kind of soft sculpt. Okay. Same tool settings, nothing's really changing over here. Okay. I'm also not doing anything artistic. I'm just demoing out what these brushes are, so I don't want no judging right now. Next one is spray. Spray is supposed to be used in tandem with the stamp. So as you're dragging along, it'll spray this this stamp texture on our surface. So if I'm going along, it's spraying that texture on there. So it's really good for driving in that interesting texture you might be after. And actually, let's go ahead and back this up so I can actually show two things at the same time. So we're going to do spray. Okay, I'm going to type some of that in there. Now, the reason why I did that was because I wanted to show you that if you're doing some of this surface detail stuff, you're like, that was cool, but I don't want it to be so intense. You can always use the strength over here and dial down some of the opacity on that sculpt layer. Okay. Or bring it back up, it's up to you, or just turn it off altogether. Lots of power in sculpting layers. Okay, so repeat uses the same stamp. So like this is kind of like something you'd probably want to use on hard surface, but basically like we'll use the same stamp over like a longer piece, and might want to turn like stamp spacing up like so. You can see how like these half moons are kind of just populating down. So if you're trying to get like some riveting or something like that, you can definitely get that really easily by just dragging along like so. Let's see here if they have anything more interesting. Spacing up a little more. Okay, so that one dots in. You can hold down Control, it inverts it, so instead of it being in, it'll be popping out. Okay, pretty cool, right? Imprint, that is for, it's kind of like stamp, but it only does it on one instance. So let's say I want it to be like that. That might be too much. Maybe I want bring the strength down on the imprint, and let's say I want it to be like that. Okay, maybe still a little bit too much. It's up to you and what you want. I mean, and then if you want more, you can always just drag in some more and they'll kind of blend in. And as you're twisting, it's kind of rotating that projection of the stamp. Okay, wax is like throwing more clay on. So as you're wanting to build up, you can kind of do a little bit like that. It's just throwing more clay on the model. It's kind of essentially what it is. You have to kind of be careful on how you're doing it, though. If you're doing it like this, and then you drop off to the side, it starts to build out from the side as well. which may be what you want, but it may actually make it to where like this ends up being a lot bigger than you intended it to be. So just make sure you're careful and aware of what you're doing. Scrape will scrape off the high points. So if I'm going through like these valleys or something like that, it'll scrape off the ridges. Fill will do the opposite. It'll fill in the valleys. So go in here and fill these gaps in. As the name implies, we go in here and fill all these guys really quick. Sometimes you need to go a little too crazy. You need to fill in your wrinkles or just fill in between two big bumps or something. Knife is an aggressive sculpting tool, so I can use that one and drive in some of those carved in details. So the stamp spacing is a little bit out, a little too much. And the intensity is really too high, so let's bring that down to 6, and that's still too high. Gotta be careful with your knife. There you go. So then you can kind of like carve in those sharp details. Well, this is all stretched out, so it's not getting really good right there. Kind of like that. Might need to step up subdivision there, as you can see all the polygons here. You're not getting really good carving here. So let's go ahead and just jump up another subdivision level, and we'll continue on. So add new subdivision level. Okay. Now we're at almost 393,000. Yeah, 393,000 polygons. Oh, but we need to create another layer for that. Okay. So now the knife is much better looking. Okay, so this works really good if you're trying to carve in some surface details. If it goes in too deep, you can always just soften those up, or you can always just go back over here and adjust the intensity. But knife tends to want to just kind of get in there and groove it. If you hold down Control with knife and left mouse button drag, you'll get the inverse of it. So you'll have maybe that's something you were after, is having some kind of sharp edge that came out. You can just add a little softness to it and soften off the ridge line there. Smear will basically grab faces underneath the brush and just drag them in the direction the brush is going. So I haven't really found a really good use for smear, to be honest with you. Maybe the intensity is too much. Maybe I bring it down to like 1 and try to do like a smear and kind of grab some of this, but it just seems like the grab and smooth functions would just be my go-tos usually. So going to a smear tool is just something I've always avoided. That's just me though. Lots of tools here, and depends on what feels good to you. Let's go ahead and look at the Bulge tool. Bulge is kind of interesting. It's kind of like, you know, when you're reshaping, but it's taking one spot on it and just kind of pushing the polygons out along the normal of the faces. And essentially gets what you're after, but sometimes you end up with this weird stuff where you bulged out this spot and you bulged out that spot, and the faces in here are pinched. So you end up like going back and trying to smooth it out, or use your relax tool and like push the polygons apart. So you know, bulge can get you like, you know, what you're after really quick, but it could also end up putting you in a situation where you're like, ah, that creates some bad geometry. So kind of use your own discretion on bulge. Amplify will take your sculpted texture and amplify the height and the depth of it. So if you're trying to like, you know, drive in some more details on some of this texture here we did, you can just go over it with Amplify and it'll pull those details back out. Same thing over here. Go and just rub it over the top here, and you see how the high points are getting higher and the low points are getting lower. So that's kind of cool. It's something that I use every now and then. Usually I kind of get it in the ballpark to begin with, so it's not like I'm using this as an actual shaping tool, but it does help you kind of take something that might have been subtle and ramp it up to where it actually fits the bill. Freeze and mask, these things are kind of obvious. You can like freeze an area that you don't want to have it be affected anymore, and then you can go back to your sculpting and it won't affect these frozen areas, which works really well if you're trying to like create like this like panel kind of look. And kind of build up around it, and then when you go to unfreeze it, I think it's Control or Shift U. Now you have like this nice smooth area with like where it bulges up around it. It kind of gives you like a panel kind of feel, which is pretty interesting. Masking is fairly similar. Just do Control, and you can decide which spots you want to mask. And then this is for this layer, so it's kind of like you're painting in what we just did here down below. It's kind of like you're doing the same thing. You're just painting in that effect, and then like you see how it's just for that layer. It doesn't really go away though, so like you end up just removing this detail. So you can paint in a bunch of cool texture detail and then just remove it with the mask, which is pretty neat. Something we'll explore a little later on in our later projects. And then erase. Erase is also fairly obvious. It's just going to erase whatever sculpting geometry you did. So that pretty much does it for the sculpting tool sets here. We have a variation of stamps and stencils we can use in conjunction with all of these tools. And I'm going to not necessarily go down them right now just because there's so many of them to demo. But when we get into our preceding projects after this, we'll be looking at all these different stamps and stencils and using them to drive in the details for after. So that ends the UI overview of the Paint and Sculpt tools in Mudbox 2017, and I'll see you guys in the next project. Thanks for watching.